The town was small, but it had a feeling of familiarity that many people loved. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's name, and nothing ever really changed. The streets were quiet, the people were friendly, and the sense of community was strong. For years, this was the home of our protagonist, a woman named Jasmine Williams. Jasmine had been away for a long time. After joining the army at the age of 18, she had spent years away from home, serving as an army ranger. Her time in the military had shaped her into someone stronger, someone more focused, and someone who had learned the value of discipline and leadership. It was a life she never imagined for herself, but it was one she was proud of. Jasmine had faced some of the most challenging situations a person could imagine, and she had come out stronger every time. But now, after so many years, she had come back to the place she once called home. The town was the same as she remembered it, peaceful, quiet, and full of familiar faces. But something felt different. The town was changing, and Jasmine could feel it in the air. There was tension in the streets, something that wasn't there before. At first, she couldn't put her finger on it. The people she spoke to seemed different too, not as friendly as they used to be. There was an unease that hung over everything like a storm waiting to break. Jasmine tried to focus on her family. She spent time with her mother, who was happy to have her home after all these years. They had always been close, and her mother had missed her dearly. They would talk about old times, about how Jasmine used to run around the town when she was younger, laughing with her friends. Her mother would cook the same meals she made when Jasmine was a child, and they would sit around the table and share stories. It felt good to be home, but even in these quiet moments, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just her family that seemed different. It was the town itself. There were whispers on the street, small groups gathering in hushed conversations. Jasmine would pass by, and people would stop talking when she approached, as though they were afraid of saying something in front of her. It wasn't anything overt, no one was openly rude, but it was the small, subtle things that told her this place wasn't the same anymore. Jasmine would often take walks to clear her mind. She'd walk along the same paths she'd walked as a child, past the old bakery where the smell of fresh bread would fill the air, past the small park where she used to play. She could still remember the feeling of the swings beneath her, the joy of being a kid without a care in the world. But now, the streets felt colder. There were fewer smiles, fewer people sitting on the park benches. People seemed to be walking with their heads down, avoiding eye contact as if they were afraid of something. Jasmine couldn't help but wonder what had happened to this once welcoming town. One afternoon, she saw something that made her stomach turn. A large group of people was standing in the town square, holding up signs. The signs were filled with hateful words, targeting different races, different cultures, and anyone they considered outsiders. Jasmine stood there, shocked, as she read the words on the signs. How had things gotten so bad? The anger and hatred that filled the air were palpable. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had always known there were people with these beliefs, but to see them standing out in the open, so bold, was something she couldn't wrap her mind around. As she watched, a protester turned to look at her. Their eyes met for a moment, and she could see the disdain in their gaze. Jasmine was used to being judged, but this was different. This was a judgment born from hatred, and it was directed at her simply because of who she was. She wasn't just a black woman, she was someone who had served in the army, someone who had faced danger head-on, someone who was proud of her strength and her achievements. But to these people, none of that mattered. All they saw was the color of her skin. Jasmine quickly walked away from the scene, her mind racing. She had seen hate before, had even faced it in some of the toughest situations during her military career. But this was different. This wasn't an enemy in a distant land, this was in her own hometown. Her heart ached as she thought about the people she had once known, the friends she had once trusted. How had it come to this? How had the town she grew up in become a place where people were so openly filled with hatred? Later that evening, Jasmine tried to distract herself by calling her old friend, Tasha. They hadn't spoken in years, but Jasmine remembered Tasha as someone who had always been there for her. She hoped that maybe Tasha could shed some light on what was going on in the town. They spoke for a while, reminiscing about the old days. But when Jasmine asked about the protests and the rising tensions, Tasha's voice grew quieter. "It's been getting worse, Jas," Tasha said softly. "I don't know how to explain it. The protests, the hate, it's like it just came out of nowhere. People are getting angrier every day, and no one knows how to stop it. I wish I had answers, but I don't. I wish we could go back to the way things were." Jasmine's heart sank. She hadn't expected the situation to be this bad. She had hoped it was just a small group of extremists, but it was clear now that the hate was spreading. The town she had once called home, the place that had been her safe haven, was now a battleground for ideologies she couldn't understand. As the days went on, Jasmine became more and more aware of the growing tension in the air. She couldn't escape the feeling that something was about to happen. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for a spark to set it all off. Jasmine couldn't ignore it anymore. She had faced war, danger, and the worst the world could throw at her during her time in the army, but this was different. This was her home, and she wasn't going to stand by and watch it crumble under the weight of hatred. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: Jasmine wasn't about to let the town fall into chaos without a fight. She had seen too much in her life to ignore what was happening right in front of her. And now, she would have to decide whether to stand up and face the storm or walk away from the place that had once been her home. It was a chilly morning when the town square seemed unusually full. The usual sounds of birds chirping and the hum of quiet conversations were replaced by the uneasy shuffling of feet and hushed voices. Jasmine had been walking to the local coffee shop when she noticed the crowd gathering. She paused for a moment, wondering what was happening. As she got closer, the feeling in the air shifted. There was something off about it. It wasn't just the sheer number of people, it was the way they stood, rigid and tense, with faces that seemed angry but controlled, like they were waiting for something to happen. Jasmine felt a knot form in her stomach. The protest she had seen before was now even bigger, and from the looks of it, the atmosphere was growing more volatile by the minute. Jasmine tried to stay out of the crowd's view, not wanting to draw attention to herself. She had been home for a little over a week now, and already it seemed like things were going from bad to worse. The protesters, mostly young men and women in their 20s, were shouting slogans about taking their town back. Their faces were painted with rage, their signs bearing messages that twisted the truth, spreading fear and division. The sight was enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. Jasmine turned to leave, but a voice suddenly called out to her. "Hey, you there!" She froze. It was the voice of one of the protesters. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned slowly, trying to remain calm. The last thing she wanted was to get involved, but it was clear they were looking for someone, and from the way the voice was directed at her, it was impossible to ignore. A man, in his mid-30s, with rough features and a scruffy beard, stepped forward, pointing directly at her. "Yeah, you," he said with a sneer. "What are you doing here, huh? This town's for people who belong, not for outsiders like you." Jasmine felt her jaw tighten. She had been prepared for this, but hearing it out loud still made her blood boil. She wasn't an outsider. This was her home. But she knew better than to engage in an argument with someone like him. It was what they wanted. To provoke her, to drag her into their world of hate. But the words kept coming. "You don't belong here, do you? Go back to where you came from." Jasmine's fists clenched at her sides. She could feel the anger rising in her chest, but she also knew that reacting to this would only make it worse. The protesters around her were growing louder, feeding off each other's energy. It was like a fire that could quickly spiral out of control. But in that moment, Jasmine's training kicked in. She had been through too much in her military career to let her emotions take over now. She took a deep breath, remembering the drills she had learned in the army. Stay calm. Think. Analyze the situation. She could feel her mind focusing, pushing aside the noise and chaos around her. She kept her gaze fixed on the man who had addressed her, refusing to look away. This was not the time to show weakness. She needed to stand strong. The man took a step closer, now only a few feet away from her. His breath reeked of alcohol and the intensity in his eyes told Jasmine that he wasn't backing down. "What's wrong?" Too scared to answer, he taunted, his voice growing louder, drawing the attention of those nearby. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest, but her exterior remained steady. "I'm not scared," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm just not going to waste my time on people who think hatred is the answer." There was a long pause, and for a second, Jasmine thought the situation might de-escalate. But then, the man sneered again. "Well, maybe you'll change your tune when we're done with you." In an instant, Jasmine realized how quickly things could get out of hand. She wasn't just facing an angry protester anymore. This was a mob. A group of people who were beginning to surround her, their eyes filled with suspicion and hostility. Jasmine's military instincts told her to keep moving, to get out before things escalated further. She slowly began to turn away, hoping that her calmness would make them lose interest. But that's when it happened. One of the protesters, a young woman, shoved her from behind, knocking her off balance. Jasmine quickly steadied herself, spinning around to face the woman who had dared to touch her. The crowd roared in approval, egging the woman on. The young woman sneered. "You don't belong here, you piece of trash. Go back to where you came from." For a moment, Jasmine considered walking away, but then something inside her clicked. She couldn't just walk away. Not when it was happening right in front of her. Not when she had the ability to do something about it. Without thinking, Jasmine took a step back, moving to position herself in a way that would give her space to defend herself if necessary. Her mind raced. She didn't want to hurt anyone. She just wanted to get out of there. But she also knew she couldn't let them think they could push her around. They needed to understand that she wasn't afraid. The young woman lunged at her, trying to grab her arm, but Jasmine easily sidestepped her. The woman stumbled forward, caught off guard by Jasmine's quick reflexes. The crowd seemed stunned, and for a brief moment, Jasmine had the upper hand. But that moment was short-lived. The man from earlier lunged at her, pushing her back into the crowd. The protesters cheered, their anger intensifying. It was clear now that they weren't just angry at her, they were angry at everything she represented. They didn't care who she was or what she had done. All that mattered was the color of her skin and the fact that she didn't fit into their narrow view of the world. Jasmine's heart raced as she tried to push her way through the crowd. She couldn't stay there any longer. Every instinct told her to get away, but the mob's energy was suffocating. They were closing in on her, blocking her every exit. Then, a voice broke through the chaos. "Get out of here, now." It was Tasha. Jasmine turned, surprised to see her old friend rushing toward her. Tasha's face was a mixture of concern and anger as she pushed through the crowd, shoving people out of the way. "Move!" Tasha shouted. "She's not going anywhere with you." Tasha grabbed Jasmine's arm, pulling her away from the growing mob. They pushed through the crowd, dodging shoves and angry glares, until they reached the edge of the square. Tasha didn't stop until they were out of the mob's sight. Both women were breathing heavily as they stood on the quiet street corner, away from the madness. Jasmine's body was still tense, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline rush. Tasha turned to her, her face filled with concern. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. Jasmine nodded slowly, still trying to process what had just happened. "I'm fine. Just, didn't expect that to happen." Tasha looked back at the square, her expression darkening. "It's getting worse, Jas. People are getting more aggressive. I don't know how much longer we can just watch." Jasmine looked back at the chaos, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She had known it was bad, but this was something else. The protesters weren't just angry anymore. They were dangerous. And she wasn't sure how much longer they could keep their town safe from the hate that was growing by the day. The chaos in the town square seemed to settle, but the unease in the air was far from gone. Jasmine's heart was still racing from the confrontation, and she couldn't shake the feeling that things had just begun to spiral out of control. She had seen hate before, during her time in the army. But this was different. This was her home, and the people in that mob were not faceless enemies. They were people she had known growing up, people she had shared laughs with, shared meals with. Yet, here they were, acting out of fear and ignorance, consumed by anger. Tasha, noticing the unease in Jasmine's eyes, gave her a reassuring pat on the back. "You okay?" she asked again, her voice still filled with concern. Jasmine nodded, though she wasn't sure how to answer. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I thought things would be better here. I didn't think it would be like this." "I know," Tasha said, her voice soft but firm. "I didn't either. But it's getting worse every day. These people, they're not just angry anymore. They're looking for a fight." Jasmine looked at her friend, trying to process her words. They were standing just off the edge of the square now, out of the immediate danger but still within earshot of the crowd. The loud shouting, the chants, they were still there, echoing in the distance. Jasmine's fists clenched involuntarily, but she forced herself to relax. She couldn't let them get to her. Not now. "Maybe we should get out of here," Tasha suggested, her voice carrying a hint of fear. "You don't belong here, not with them. I can take you somewhere safe." Jasmine knew Tasha meant well, but leaving wasn't an option for her. She had seen enough. The protesters weren't just angry at her, they were angry at everything that stood in their way. And as much as she wished she could just turn and walk away from the madness, she couldn't. Not when people were being hurt, not when things were spinning out of control. "No," Jasmine said, her voice firm. "I'm not running away from this. If I leave now, they'll think they've won. And they won't stop until they have control." Tasha frowned but didn't argue. She knew better than to push Jasmine when she made up her mind. Jasmine had always been stubborn, especially when it came to standing up for what was right. Tasha knew that about her. She just wished things didn't have to be this way. "We need to do something," Jasmine said after a long pause. "We need to stop them before they hurt someone else." Tasha nodded slowly, but her face showed a mix of doubt and fear. "I don't know, Jas. What if it gets worse? What if we can't stop them?" Jasmine turned to face her friend. "If we don't try, who will?" Tasha didn't have an answer for that. She could see the determination in Jasmine's eyes, the same fire that had driven her throughout her military career. Jasmine wasn't a person who backed down, not when it mattered. And now, more than ever, it mattered. "I'll help," Tasha said finally, her voice soft but resolute. "I'll do whatever I can. Just be careful, okay?" Jasmine smiled at her friend, grateful for her support. "I will. But I need you to stay safe. Don't do anything reckless." They stood in silence for a few moments, each lost in their own thoughts, before Jasmine took a deep breath and turned to face the town square once more. The protest was still in full swing, the mob growing in number. The protesters were getting louder, their chants more forceful. It was clear that this wasn't just a protest anymore, it was an attempt to force their beliefs on everyone else. Jasmine knew she couldn't just stand by. She had to do something. But what? What could she do against so many? She took a few steps forward, feeling the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. This wasn't a battle she could fight alone. She needed help. But there was no one to turn to, no one to rely on except herself. She had learned that lesson a long time ago. As she walked closer to the square, the protesters noticed her. It was hard to miss the woman walking straight toward them, tall and confident, her eyes fixed on the mob. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to back down. Not this time. A few of the protesters shouted at her, trying to provoke her, but Jasmine kept walking. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to make the crowd pause. They could see the strength in her, the calmness in her demeanor. They didn't know who she was, but they could sense that she wasn't like them. She wasn't afraid. The closer she got to the square, the more she could see how out of control things were. The protesters weren't just chanting anymore. They were pushing, shoving, some of them throwing objects at anyone who didn't look like them. Jasmine's heart sank as she watched one man shove an elderly woman to the ground. She felt the anger rising inside her again, but she kept it in check. Now was not the time to lose control. Without thinking, she moved toward the elderly woman, helping her to her feet. The woman's eyes were wide with fear, and she clutched onto Jasmine for support. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jasmine smiled gently, offering her reassurance. "You're okay now," she said quietly. But inside, Jasmine's mind was racing. She couldn't let this continue. Not on her watch. As she helped the woman to safety, the mob's attention turned to her. The man who had pushed the elderly woman was glaring at her now, his face twisted in anger. "Stay out of this, lady," he spat. "This is none of your business." Jasmine didn't respond. She simply stood tall, facing him with steady resolve. She wasn't backing down. The protesters were starting to notice her now, all of them turning their attention to the woman who had dared to stand up to them. The air was thick with tension. "You don't scare me," the man shouted, taking a step forward. "You don't belong here. Go back to where you came from." Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't react. She simply stood her ground, her eyes locked onto his. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence, the tension building between them. Then, slowly, the man's posture shifted. He looked around at the others, who were watching intently, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Jasmine knew it wasn't time to fight. Not yet. But she had to make them see that they couldn't push her around. Not anymore. Not when she had the strength to stand tall, to fight back when it mattered most. The crowd seemed to hesitate, unsure of what to do. Some of the protesters looked uncomfortable, their anger beginning to waver as they saw Jasmine's unwavering calm. It was like a ripple went through them, the first sign of doubt creeping into their minds. Jasmine wasn't scared. And in that moment, they began to realize they couldn't control her the way they thought they could. As she stood there, facing the mob, Jasmine knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. The battle wasn't over. But she had already taken the first step toward stopping the hate. The tension in the air was palpable. Jasmine stood at the edge of the crowd, her body poised, ready for whatever might happen next. The moment had shifted. The protesters weren't charging at her anymore, but their anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. She could feel their eyes on her, watching, waiting for her to make a move. But Jasmine remained calm. She was still. It was as if time had slowed down, and the world around her had blurred into the background. All she could focus on was the crowd before her. The protesters weren't just shouting anymore. Their voices were quieter now, uncertain, like they were waiting for someone to lead them. Jasmine could see it in their eyes. They weren't so sure anymore. She had made an impact. For the first time, they saw her as more than just a target. She wasn't afraid, and it was making them question their actions. Some of them, even a few of the loudest voices in the crowd, were starting to look uncertain. Jasmine took a slow, steady breath. She wasn't going to let this moment slip away. She had come here to stop the violence, to make a stand, and now, this was her chance to change everything. She stood tall, her posture strong and confident. She knew she had to say something, but what? The right words could make all the difference, and she had to be careful. She didn't want to escalate things, but she also needed to show them that there was no going back. "I know what you're feeling," Jasmine said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs in the crowd. "I know you're angry. But anger isn't the answer." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything was silent. Jasmine looked around, meeting the eyes of those who were still watching her. There was no hiding the surprise in their faces. Some of them seemed taken aback, like they weren't expecting her to speak at all. They had been ready for a fight, but she wasn't giving them that. "Anger only hurts," she continued, her voice firm. "It doesn't solve anything. It doesn't bring you peace. It doesn't make you stronger. It only makes things worse." Jasmine paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. She could see that some of them were listening now, really listening. But there were others who still looked angry, still looked ready to lash out. Jasmine's heart beat faster, but she didn't falter. She wasn't just trying to calm them down. She was trying to reach them, to make them understand that hate wouldn't fix what they were feeling. "I've been through things you can't even imagine," Jasmine said, her voice softer now, almost like she was speaking to each person individually. "I've faced real danger. I've fought for my life, for my country, and for the people I love. But that doesn't make me a hero. It just makes me someone who knows that violence only leads to more violence." There was a slight shift in the crowd. A few people in the back looked down, avoiding eye contact, while others seemed to reconsider their stance. Jasmine could see it, the small change, the crack in the wall of anger that had built up around them. They were starting to see her, not as an enemy, but as someone who had been through the same struggles, someone who understood. "I'm not your enemy," she said, her tone gentle but unwavering. "I'm just a person, just like you. I don't want to fight. I don't want to hurt anyone. But I also won't let hate control me. And I won't let it control you." The words seemed to sink in, a ripple of doubt spreading through the crowd. Jasmine wasn't sure if it was enough to stop the anger completely, but it was a start. It was a crack in the surface. She could feel it, the shift in the energy around her. The crowd was no longer as unified as before. Some were starting to question their actions, their beliefs. Others, though, were still set in their ways, unwilling to let go of the hate that had been fueling them. The man who had shouted at her earlier, the one with the scruffy beard, stepped forward again, his expression hard. He looked at Jasmine with a mix of confusion and defiance, like he wasn't sure if he should listen or keep fighting. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded. "You think talking to us will change anything?" Jasmine met his gaze with calm certainty. "I think it's worth trying," she replied. "You're all angry, but I can see that deep down, you don't want this. You don't want to keep fighting. You don't want to hurt anyone. But that's what hate does. It tricks you into thinking you're doing something right when all you're doing is causing more pain." For a moment, the man just stared at her, his eyes narrowing. He looked like he was about to say something, but instead, he hesitated. His grip on the sign he was holding tightened, then loosened, as if he wasn't sure whether to throw it down or keep holding on. The crowd, too, seemed to be waiting, unsure of what would happen next. Jasmine didn't back down. She kept her stance strong, her eyes never leaving his. She had said her piece, but now it was up to them. It was up to the crowd to decide if they would continue down this path of anger or if they would listen to the words she had offered. One by one, people in the crowd started to shift. A few of them lowered their signs, their faces softening. The anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but Jasmine could see that it wasn't as strong as before. The people who had once been shouting the loudest were now silent, their expressions a mix of confusion and contemplation. Then, a voice broke through the silence. It was a woman, standing near the back of the crowd. She wasn't shouting or yelling, but her voice was clear and steady. "She's right," the woman said, her eyes scanning the group. "We've been doing this for too long. This hate, it's not helping us. It's just making things worse." The words seemed to hang in the air, and Jasmine felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there were others here who could see the truth. Others who were ready to step away from the anger and the hatred. The woman's words seemed to spark something in the crowd, a quiet murmur of agreement. For a moment, Jasmine thought they might actually listen. But then, the man with the scruffy beard shouted again, his voice full of frustration. "You're all weak," he spat. "She's lying to you. This is the only way. If we don't stand up for ourselves, no one will." Jasmine's heart sank. She could feel the old, familiar anger rising in the man's voice, and it seemed to infect the crowd once more. The atmosphere shifted again, the doubt and hesitation giving way to fury. Jasmine's body tensed, ready for whatever might come next. She had hoped to avoid a fight, but it was clear now that the crowd wasn't ready to let go of their hate. Not yet. But Jasmine didn't back down. She knew this wasn't over. There were still people out there who wanted peace, who wanted to see the world differently. She would reach them. She wouldn't stop. She couldn't stop. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. "I'm not going anywhere. And neither should you. We're better than this." The words rang out, clear and strong, as the crowd fell into an uneasy silence once again. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The battle was far from over, but Jasmine wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The silence that followed Jasmine's words was heavy, almost suffocating. The crowd stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Some of the protesters still clutched their signs tightly, their eyes filled with a mixture of anger and uncertainty. Others looked down, avoiding Jasmine's gaze, as though her presence was a challenge to everything they had believed. Jasmine felt her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the moment hung in the air. She had spoken, and now she waited. For a moment, it seemed like nothing would change. The protesters were still there, still angry, but there was a shift, a subtle change in the atmosphere. The anger wasn't as sharp as before. It had softened, just a little. Jasmine took a deep breath. She knew this wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not when so many people were still filled with hatred. But maybe, just maybe, she had made a dent. She had spoken the truth, and now it was up to them to decide whether they would listen or let their anger consume them. The man who had been the loudest, the one who had tried to provoke her earlier, was still standing at the front of the crowd. His face was flushed with frustration, his fists clenched at his sides. He glared at Jasmine, but there was a hesitation in his eyes now, a flicker of doubt that hadn't been there before. Jasmine met his gaze without flinching. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. She had been through too much to back down now. She knew that the hardest battles weren't the ones fought with fists or weapons, they were the ones fought with words, with courage, with the strength to stand up for what was right. And she was ready for this one. "You're wrong," the man finally said, his voice shaking with anger. "You think just talking is going to change anything? You think you can make us see the world your way? It doesn't work like that. Jasmine's heart raced, but she didn't let the fear show on her face. She had been ready for this. She had known that there would be resistance, that not everyone would listen. But she wasn't going to stop. Not when so many were still trapped in their own anger and fear. Maybe I can't change everyone, Jasmine replied calmly. But I know one thing for sure: fighting, hating, it's never going to make anything better. It'll only make things worse. The man looked at her, his eyes narrowing. He opened his mouth to say something else, but before he could, someone from the crowd spoke up. A woman, her voice shaky but firm. She's right, the woman said, her voice cutting through the tension. I've been angry for so long. But, what has it gotten me? It hasn't brought me peace. It hasn't made anything better. Jasmine's eyes shifted to the woman. She could see the pain in her face, the regret in her eyes. The woman had been caught in the same cycle of anger, the same bitterness. But now, something had clicked inside her. Maybe she wasn't the only one. Maybe there were more people here who were starting to see things differently. I've lost so much to hate, the woman continued, her voice breaking. I don't want to lose any more. I don't want to hate anymore. Jasmine's heart softened. She knew what it felt like to carry that kind of pain. The kind that made you lash out at the world, the kind that made you blind to everything else. It wasn't easy to let go of it, but it was possible. And she could see that this woman was starting to understand that. The man who had been leading the charge seemed taken aback. He looked around, his face contorting in confusion, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Jasmine could see the cracks in his armor now, the doubt creeping in. The anger still burned inside him, but it was no longer the only thing that defined him. There was something else, something deep inside that was questioning everything he had been taught, everything he had believed. For a moment, he stood there, his eyes darting from Jasmine to the woman who had spoken up, to the other protesters who were now looking at each other with uncertainty in their eyes. They were starting to see it. They were starting to see the truth, the way out of the cycle of hate. The man took a step back, shaking his head as if trying to clear the confusion from his mind. He wasn't ready to admit it yet, but he was close. Jasmine could feel it. The change was happening, slowly but surely. You don't get it, he muttered, his voice low, almost defeated. You don't understand what it's like, to be afraid, to feel like you're losing everything. I do understand, Jasmine said softly, her voice filled with compassion. I've been afraid, too. But fighting that fear with hate only makes it stronger. I've learned that the hard way. And I don't want to keep making the same mistakes. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at Jasmine with a mixture of frustration and confusion. The crowd was growing quieter now, the tension slowly dissipating. Jasmine could see the change in them. The anger wasn't gone, but it had lessened, softened, just a little. They were starting to listen. They were starting to hear her. You have a choice, Jasmine continued, her voice steady and firm. You can keep holding onto your hate, your fear, and let it control you. Or you can let it go. You can choose to see each other as people, not enemies. You can choose peace over anger. The crowd was silent now, each person lost in their own thoughts. Jasmine could feel the weight of the moment. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But she had made her point. She had given them something to think about. The rest was up to them. For a long time, no one spoke. But then, a man in the back of the crowd raised his hand. I don't want to hate anymore, he said quietly. I'm tired of it. The words seemed to break the silence. Slowly, others began to speak up, their voices uncertain but growing stronger. I don't want to hate either, another man said. Jasmine felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't a full victory yet, but it was a start. It was a shift, a crack in the wall that had once separated them. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. The man at the front of the crowd, the one who had been the most vocal in his anger, turned and walked away without another word. He didn't shout, didn't make a scene. He just walked away, leaving behind the group that had once followed him. As the crowd began to disperse, Jasmine felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't perfect. The hate wasn't gone, but the seed of change had been planted. And that was enough for now. Jasmine turned to Tasha, who had been standing by her side the whole time, watching in silence. "Did you see that?" Jasmine asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "They listened. They actually listened." Tasha nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You did it, Jas," she said softly. "You made a difference." Jasmine smiled, but it was a bittersweet smile. She knew this wasn't the end. There would be more battles to fight, more challenges to face. But for now, this moment, this small victory, was enough. And as the last of the protesters walked away, Jasmine knew that she had done something important. She had stood up for what was right, and in doing so, she had given others the courage to do the same. The fight wasn't over, but for now, there was peace.